Hello, fellow readers and booktubers. About 4 months ago, I posted a short video showing off my latest purchase from the Folio Society, and it was the Folio edition of Dante's Divine Comedy. Just a wonderful thing. I think many of you are familiar with the Folio Society. They're a London-based publishing house, and they put out these really wonderful editions of classic works. And they pull out all the stops. They have their own illustrators, and they commission special introductions to the works, and the books are just made with great loving care, and they're boxed editions and everything like this. So this was their edition of Dante's Divine Comedy, and I showed this in that short little video I posted a while ago, and it's really beautifully done, magnificent work. I think this was published by the Folio Society, just a couple years ago, 2023. Okay, now this is the translation of the Divine Comedy by Robin Kirkpatrick, who is a British poet in his own right. He's Professor Emeritus of English and Italian Literature at Cambridge, a Dante scholar. He's written a lot of studies of Renaissance literature and Renaissance history and all that, so it's a man who knows his work. This is his translation of this. And it's beautifully illustrated, again, especially commissioned by the Folio Society. The illustrator is Neil Packer. He does these kind of, let's see if I can find a couple good examples here. They're kind of surreal, vaguely disturbing illustrations, but they get the point across. They're really very well done throughout. Every section of the Divine Comedy has illustrations on almost every page. Just beautifully rendered in all of this. There's an introduction in here by Jhumpa Lahiri, who is a famous British author and essayist who is just in love with the Italian language. She moved her family, she lives in England. She had moved her family to Rome to completely immerse herself in Italian culture and all this. And she writes an introduction to this. Although as introductions go, this introduction is a little different. It's more of an impressionistic introduction. Rather than a real informative one in terms of who Dante was and what his life was all about. Yeah, she called 33 Thoughts on Dante, because each section of the Divine Comedy is divided into 33 cantos. So it's kind of an impressionistic thing. It's very interesting, though. I'd recommend it. So this is the Folio edition of Dante's Divine Comedy, his great work, one of the great works of Western civilization. There's a problem with it. This edition has no annotations, none at all. No footnotes, no explanation of anything. This translation by Kirkpatrick, there's a Penguin edition of this. That might have annotations, but the Folio Society version doesn't. There are a few pages at the end which give you translations of various Latin phrases that Dante inserted within his work. This was originally written in Italian, kind of a Tuscan dialect of Italian. One of the reasons why Dante in Italy is considered the father of the Italian language. Which also makes it a very unusual work culturally, because this was written at the height of the Middle Ages, or as the Middle Ages was transforming into the Renaissance, where all great works of poetry and intellect and philosophy were always written in Latin. Dante doesn't do that, but he does include a few Latin phrases, and in the back of this book there are translations of those phrases. But if you come from a Catholic background or know anything about Catholic hymns, you'll recognize these phrases pretty quickly. So it's hardly necessary. What is necessary, though, are annotations, and the Folio Society doesn't give you any at all. And the problem with this is to read Dante requires some grasp of mythology, classical history, medieval history, even some Catholic theology. If you don't have that, you're going to be pretty much adrift. You'll be reading Dante without a net, so to speak. And also, what is this really? Now, this is a question I don't have an answer to. A lot of literary critics and scholars and historians have pondered this a great deal about, what has Dante produced here? It's a very famous work. I think most of you know it for the first part of it, Dante's Inferno. That's just one of 3 parts of this massive work. But what is it? Dante, he doesn't make any claim that he had an actual vision here. So this is not some supernatural vision that he had. It's not a fantasy in the way that we think of fantasies. when we think of a fantasy, we think of Tolkien, who created Middle Earth, a total fabrication, but a brilliant one at that. That's not what this is. And it's not like a science fiction work where a science fiction writer will imagine a distant planet and he'll come up with what the life forms are like and what their culture is all about. That's not what this is. Dante is describing the afterlife in the way it was understood at his time, in his time. He's tweaking it a little bit, but there are real people in this that populate the afterlife. Kings and popes and emperors and villains and saints and sinners, but real people. He's not making up characters. So what is he telling us here? What is this all about? What is it? It's an adventure story in a way, but Dante doesn't claim it actually happened to him, but he's just pondering the afterlife. But he's seeing it through a religious lens. And the religion for Dante, the High Middle Ages, it's Christianity in Western Europe, and if you were a Christian, you were a Catholic. And if you come from a Catholic background, a lot of what Dante describes here, or at least his impressions or his attempt to dramatize the afterlife, a lot of this should be pretty familiar to you. If you're not a Catholic, if you're a Christian of any other stripe, some of it will be very familiar to you. If you're not any kind of Christian at all, you're going to be kind of adrift. Let me revise that. Even if you are a Christian, you're going to be quite adrift if you don't have any annotations. What's the story? It begins with a man, it's Dante talking, but it's like a fictional Dante. He's having some kind of midlife crisis and he's stumbling through the woods looking for meaning, and a spiritual being appears who leads him into the underworld. First hell, and then purgatory, and then heaven. His spiritual guide for the first part of this, again, is an historic figure. It's Virgil, the famous Roman who wrote the Aeneid and some other famous poems. So it's a real person. And so, the narrator of this talks about how Virgil leads him into hell. That's the Inferno. And I think this is the part of the Divine Comedy that everybody knows, the various circles of hell. And you kind of spiral downward. And the lower you get, the more grave the sin, the more horrifying the tortures, until in the absolute pit of hell, there's Lucifer himself. It's awful and it's scary and dark and it smells bad and everything else. But then Virgil quickly leads Dante out of that into purgatory. Now, this is what identifies this as a uniquely Catholic poem. The Catholic Church still teaches a purgatory. I've heard it described as heaven's waiting room. That's not quite accurate. The central idea here is when you die, if you haven't committed any deadly sins that would be worthy of eternal damnation, then you go to purgatory. Your soul is still weighed down by sin, but in purgatory you're purged of that weight. You're purged of that stain. It's a long process. It takes time. It could take thousands of years, but eventually, as your soul is, the weight of the sin becomes less and less, your soul becomes kind of more buoyant until finally, whoop, you go right up into heaven. So purgatory, to purge. It's the place of purging. And so Dante goes through that part of it, and then he comes to heaven itself. So the second part of the poem is the purgatory. Heaven is the paradiso, or the third part is heaven, the paradiso. And here Virgil has to leave off because Virgil was born before the time of Christ, so he isn't saved, he can't enter heaven. But here other spiritual beings take over, including Dante's beloved Beatrice, who was a real person. And heaven is kind of like the reverse of hell. There are various circles of heaven leading up to where God himself is. And again, he encounters historical individuals, including various popes and saints. St. Thomas Aquinas is here, St. Augustine is here, St. Francis is here, St. Bernard, St. Benedict. They're all there. And also some female saints. He doesn't leave out the women. But that's essentially, that's the poem. Now, I've read enough translations of Dante's Divine Comedy, and I have a good enough grasp of mythology and classical history, ancient Greek and Roman history. I teach that. I've been teaching that for 25 years, so I'm pretty solid there. And I have a graduate degree in medieval history, And so I have you study medieval history, it's not just the events of the time, and the events in Dante's time in Italy were pretty chaotic. Dante himself was very politically involved and got in a lot of trouble in his life, even exiled from his beloved Florence, which is then when he writes this thing. I also have an understanding of some Catholic medieval theology and all of that. So anyway, when I started reading this, I realized pretty early on that there aren't any annotations. And so I have a couple different editions of Dante. The one that's the best annotated is this three volume work translated by Anthony Esolen. Anthony Esolen, where does he teach? He's a poet and professor of English at Providence College. He's written extensively on the Renaissance and medieval literature. In addition to his translation of Dante, he's also translated Lucretius and Tasso. And this is a 3-volume work, and it's heavily annotated. Tons of footnotes, a lot of explanation of what's going on, who the different characters are, and what's happening. It's incredibly helpful. So as I started reading the Folio edition, and I realized those helpful notes weren't there, I kept turning back to the Esolen translation. But then at one point I thought, you know what? I think I might be able to do this without that help. I might be able to read Dante Without A Net. And so I did. And I have to admit, there were moments I was kind of lost, but other moments, no, I pretty much got what was going on. I knew who these people were. Then there were moments where I knew exactly what was happening. I was kind of proud of myself. It was an exciting moment. But still, it was a little risky. Again, without a net, you could fall, you could make a mistake, but I got through to the end. And I must say, even reading Dante Without A Net, and in English, it still has this incredibly strange impact. When you finish reading this, you feel like you've been somewhere else, but not a make-believe somewhere else, a real somewhere else that isn't really real. It's a surreal experience. You finish this and it impacts you. It's very strange. You come back down to earth. It's like waking up from a dream that was one part horrifying, one part strange, one part glorious. But it's a dream, and it's like you wake up from a dream, and it's one of those dreams that for the first few minutes, you're not sure that it really happened or not, and then you realize, oh no, that didn't happen. But it has a really strong impact, even reading it without all the extra notes and everything else. So, is this good? It's wonderful. Of course, it looks great. It's a Folio Society, and the Kirkpatrick translation is really, really, really good. There's some idiosyncratic things in here, but I'm not going to waste your time getting into all that business. But as a translation, if you're interested in Dante, though, I do not recommend the Folio edition. If you've never read Dante before, or maybe just read excerpts from him, I would recommend, if you want to get into Dante, go for the Anthony Esolen 3-volume translation. It's really great. And then from there, you can try some other translations. Dorothy Sayers got a great translation of the Divine Comedy, including some notes and all of that. And then someday, if you're really ambitious, and I hope someday you'll get there, you can read Dante Without A Net. Okay? But I don't recommend that you do that without first practicing. Practice. My fear is if you have never really encountered Dante and you get this, after the first 10 pages, you're going to be so lost, and you'll be disenchanted and frustrated, and you'll put this aside, and you might never return to it again. And that would be a horrible loss for you. To read Dante is to commune with the mind of a real genius, a man of profound insight into the human condition. Whether you accept this theological understanding of the afterlife, whether you believe in an afterlife or not, doesn't really matter. There's something really powerful about this work. So that's what I've got for you today. And that's it. Keep reading and stay strong.